Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Dorothy Vu, and I'm a Senior Communications Specialist in NEA's ESP Quality Department. And I'm excited to be here with my colleague, Angelica Castagnon, from our Education Policy and Practice Department for a discussion about how ESPs can engage with families in the community. Our presenters for this evening are Maggie Cass and Sherry Wilson from National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement, also known as NAFSCE. We're excited to partner with NAFSCE on this important work to ensure school communities are the safe, welcoming, and inclusive environment students and families deserve. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maggie and Sherry.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Maggie and I are delighted to be here. We actually both started out as board members at NAFSCE, and then our roles morphed, and now we are both working with NAFSCE. And Maggie serves as the senior research consultant for us and leads us in a lot of really interesting directions. And I serve as the senior director of training and engagement. And again, we are absolutely delighted to be here with you. A little bit about our organization in case you're unfamiliar with NAFSCE. NAFSCE is a national nonprofit membership association. We were created to really create a world where family engagement is universally practiced as an essential strategy for improving children's learning and for advancing equity. And we do that by advancing high impact policies and practices for family, school, and community engagement to promote child development and improve student achievement. Everything we do is focused on those things. So before we start, we thought it would be interesting to find out who you are. And we have a little poll for you. We're going to go ahead and launch the poll now, so we can just get a sense of who is in the room. And while Jessica's launching the poll, Maggie, if you want to say anything about your background.
Yeah, I would love to. Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie Casp. As Sherry mentioned, I'm a senior research consultant here at NAFSCE. When we think about NAFSCE, we like to think about three main things that we do. We do all the things you would expect an association to do, like hold webinars, we have a conference, we have newsletters, and we'll tell you more about how you can sign up for those things if you're interested. We support states, and we also really take on important projects for the field in family and community engagement. And that's one of the things that we'll be talking with you all about today. So we're looking forward to seeing how you all are voting. And Sherry, I started my career as a kindergarten and first grade teacher, and worked in schools for many years. So exciting to be here with the NEA, who's been a longtime partner of NAFSCE's in our work to enhance how educators are prepared and have opportunities to learn more about family and community engagement.
Yeah, same. Very appreciative of all of the work that NEA does to support not just educators and families, but all of the people who work in schools and ensure that every student has the opportunity to succeed. So let's see if we can see the results. Here we go. Okay, so quite a few paraeducators tonight. Lovely to see you here. Some transportation service workers. We have a health and student service worker, and a clerical service worker. Thank you.
And some comments. So we have a bunch of teachers here too. Conversations
Welcome,
going on in
teachers.
the
We did
chat.
not mean to leave you off the list.
No. That's wonderful. And an NEA director, an educator. I didn't have a choice for that option as well. So, but welcome, Susan. We're glad you're here. You're here. What we wanted to start off by just bringing the voice of other education support service staff that we've worked with in the past into this conversation. In one of the projects that we were engaged in, we had the opportunity to talk with a number of support staff and just really try to understand from them how they see their roles really supporting family and community engagement. This is one of my favorite examples. This is the director of food services who we spoke with. And they said the Title I schools were going on a trip to the circus. We wanted to do something over and above and not give them just a typical cold field trip meal. But as it turned out, there was no place at the venue to feed the kids. So when they came back to the school, we tried to simulate what they would get when they were at the circus. This director went on to talk about the multiple ways that her department really supported families and reached out to families to raise up what they wanted to see in the food choices that their district received, and really created amazing opportunities to enrich family and community engagement through their food service department. On the next slide, and I was excited to see that we have transportation folks here today. This was from our director with the our interview with the assistant director of transportation. They said, often our people are the first people families see in the morning and the last people they see in the day. We get in at around 4:30 a.m. and don't leave until every bus is back safely. We collaborate with community centers to address bus stop challenges. If a stop needs to be moved, we might arrange for students to wait safely on their property. Building these connections strengthens our community and helps families. So it's not often that we think about all the places and all the ways that families and communities are engaged through the work that we do. So just really excited to be able to lift up those voices.
So we also, one of the other projects that we did was a bit of research with the Frameworks Institute, where we looked at the way that we communicate about family and community engagement. And we had some very interesting findings. So I'm going to share with you a video of a person on the street interview where they asked just random people what they think family engagement is and if they think, it's something important that we really need. So after the video, I'm going to share with you the metaphor that we developed based on our research, and we'll talk about what that means.
So as far as schools and families working together, what would you say that looks like?
I mean, there's only so much one can do. I mean, there's so many families that you would have to work with, and that'd be a massive overhaul.
How would you say schools and communities work together?
How I would like have communities and schools directly interact, but maybe there should be something there. I'm not.
So that was not uncommon. Most of the people that we asked that question to had very similar responses. And what we discovered is that when we communicate about family engagement and use a space launch metaphor, it's like waving a magic wand, and it just transforms the way that people think about family and community engagement. So this is the metaphor that Frameworks developed and tested extensively for us. They said, just as a space launch relies on a team of people working together to plan and complete a mission, families, schools, and communities can work together to launch children's learning. This involves planning successful learning by collaborating at the start of the school year. And when families, schools, and communities work together throughout the year on their shared mission, student learning takes off. So it's interesting, the research that they did, they tested lots of different metaphors, and they test metaphors every time they research something. They do a ton of research all over the world in social sector fields. They have never seen a metaphor that is as impactful as our space lunch metaphor. Completely transforms the way people think about family and community engagement. So I'm going to play another video for you. And this is the same guy you saw in the last video, but he heard the space launch metaphor. And let's listen to how different his response is now.
So I'm curious what you took away from that.
Boom. That's it. I mean, since what I've been saying, everything's connected. We all work together. Everybody wins. As if we all help each other up. We pull each other's bootstraps.
How would you say that affects children's learning?
I would say it'd be a very healthy relationship because, for one, that everybody's pooling their resources to fuel our future. Our children are our future, and but at the same time, it shows kids that, hey, if we work together, we can get stuff done. We can make this world just a little bit better every day.
So we love to use these videos because it is a constant reminder to everyone that we're all in this together. We all have the same shared goal. We want kids to be successful and to grow up to be well-educated, successful citizens. And when we all work together, just as he said in the second video, we fuel our future that way, and lift each other's bootstraps. It's just amazing to hear that after video.
Thanks, Sherry. So in the spirit of how we all work together, one of the definitions and ways that we at NAFSCE and many others in the field of family and community engagement think about what family and community engagement is we like to think about it as a team of people working together, a shared responsibility among families, schools, and communities to support student learning. So we think about family and community engagement as not a one-size-fits-all program or service, but on one hand, it's the ways that families are guiding, supporting, and advocating for student learning. And on the other hand, it's the ways that schools and communities are reaching out to neighborhoods and families and building relationships with them. And I just want to be very clear here that what we're talking about is not to be confused with efforts that are really operating under the guise of parental rights that are really starting to polarize and divide our schools and communities. What we're talking about is families, educators, and communities collaborating and partnering, just like the director of food services you heard from, or the assistant director of transportation. The second important thing that I want everyone to think a little bit about when we think about family and community engagement, and Sherry, we're going to see that on the next slide, is that family engagement takes place everywhere, all the time, not just in schools. And, often when people think about family engagement, they think about parent-teacher conferences or back to school nights, or, maybe a reading or literacy family night. And while all of these things are important, what's also important to remember is that family and community engagement takes place all the time, both in school and out of school. I always like to come back to the statistic on the screen, which is that of the 6,000 waking hours that our students have available to them each year, only 1,000 of those hours are actually spent in school, leaving 5,000 hours for students to explore their interests and learn in spaces outside of school, like in after-school programs, in museums and parks. So thinking about those collaborations are really important ways to think about our family and community engagement work. And the third thing that is important for us to think about when we think about family engagement is that it takes place across time. When families are constantly thinking about ways that they're supporting their children's learning, all the way from when children are, infants to when they're adolescents. Although the ways that families might be engaged in learning might look different at different periods of time, we know from research that engagement remains important across the developmental spectrum. And that really leads to my last point here, which is perhaps most importantly, that when we practice family and community engagement in all the ways that I've mentioned as a shared responsibility across spaces, across time, we know that there are a lot of positive benefits for families, for students, and for teachers and for communities. For students, it leads to improved outcomes such as higher school readiness, student achievement, better social skills. For teachers, it leads to increased job satisfaction and reduced likelihood of leaving the profession. For families, it leads to increased family well-being, leadership, knowledge, and skills. And it really leads to healthier communities and increased opportunities for communities to thrive in ways that benefit children and youth. But there's a problem out there, which is despite all that we know about the importance of family and community engagement, there's this pervasive issue that we face in the field is that too often family-facing professionals, and by family-facing professionals, I mean anyone who in their work has a role in engaging with families, are too infrequently given opportunities to learn and practice how to engage and how to reach out to families. We conducted a recent survey of over 500 family-facing professionals, and in this survey, we found that only 47% of family-facing professionals agree or strongly agree that they were prepared to engage families. And only 64% of family-facing professionals agree or strongly agree that their school provides them with professional learning for family engagement. So that's why webinars and opportunities to learn from the NEA through their micro-credentials or through this experience and others are so important for all of us. So what Sherry and I want to talk about today is a resource that we at NAFSCE have created to help fill that gap. If you go to the next screen, Sherry, what you're going to see on the screen is something that we like to call the Family Engagement Core Competencies. And you can get this resource. We'll put the resource in the link, and we'll also share it with Dorothy, who can share it back out with you afterwards. And you could also get it from the QR code on the screen. But what this resource provides are the key skills and mindsets that help family-facing professionals build strong, meaningful partnerships with families. And we think about the family engagement core competencies as falling into four main areas that we like to call reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead. And what our research using these family engagement core competencies really shows is that when family-facing professionals use reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead in their work, they're more able to be culturally responsive and they're more equipped to yield the outcomes that lead to student success. So what Sherry and I thought we would do, and this is just to give you a sense of, we didn't just come up with these ideas willy-nilly in the back of our head. You could see here that these family engagement core competencies were developed over a 3-year period through a 6-phase process that involved reviews of the literature, numerous key informant interviews, expert interviews with parent leaders, and a field survey. So what Sherry and I thought we would do for the remainder of our time together is engage you in a virtual conversation for us to really develop the habits of mind and think about what it means to reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead. So the next time you approach an opportunity to engage with families, you have a little bit of a mantra, so if you will, to draw from to help you with those situations. But let's go ahead and get started. So when we're thinking about reflecting, what we're really thinking about is how we're looking inward to think about our own experiences growing up, maybe perhaps the ways that our own families were engaged in our own learning, perhaps some, maybe biases we have for the ways we think families may or may not or should not be involved in their children's learning. And we also look outward to really come to understand families and communities that we work with. So reflecting is really about respecting, honoring, and valuing families and embracing equity throughout family engagement. And Sherry is our expert in really thinking about what these core competencies look like on the ground. So Sherry, can you give us an example of what it looks like when family-facing professionals are reflecting around their family engagement practice?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind in some of the schools that I've worked with in the past is really thinking about how families get to school. So some kids ride buses, absolutely, and I was excited to see we have some transportation people on here, but also we have a lot of kids that just walk to school in their neighborhoods. There are some families that live in urban areas where they may have schools with very limited parking, but they have access to public transportation. There are schools in very rural areas where there's no access to public transportation, but they may have plenty of parking. One way that a lot of the educators and school professionals that I worked with do the reflect is by thinking about how can we get families to come to our building and partner with us? If we're going to work together, sometimes that means going to where families are, but sometimes it means bringing them into the building. So a good activity to do to reflect on that is, what are the opportunities to bring families into the building, and what are the challenges? Doing sort of an audit of, how do our people get to school? How hard is it, or how easy is it? And what can we do to make it easier for them so that they have every opportunity to participate in any of the activities or events that we plan in school, or have meetings with school staff?
That's great, Sherry. What we want to do is we wanted to open it up to all of you. So we put a question on the next screen, which is, what's a strategy that maybe you've used that's been helpful in learning about families? So something that you've done maybe in your work, or you've seen your school do, that helps you really understand a little bit more about what families and communities are facing. And Sherry, as you were providing your example, Samantha wrote in the chat box, I absolutely agree with you about transportation. My school's been doing a lot of events for families this year, but we don't offer transportation, and it's hindering them from being able to come, as some only have the capabilities to walk, and it might be far.
Yeah,
So it's
that
huge.
that reminds me too of a story that Dr. Karen Mapp tells about when she first started working in family engagement in one of the schools she worked with. They had a lot of events and activities for families, but they had them at night. Nobody came. And when they got a new principal, and the principal started asking people, why don't you come? They said, our neighborhood is not safe. We can't walk around here after dark. So if you're going to have your events at night, we can't come. And nobody had asked them that before. They'd been having events for years without having any kind of participation. And so when they found that out, and they started changing things so that they could have them at a time that was more convenient for families to get there, more families were able to participate.
So if you're thinking and starting to type in the chat box, we're curious to hear from you. What's a strategy that you've used that's been helpful in learning about families? Oh, and this is great. So this is from David. He says, big plans are out, small plans are in. Yes, family engagement night is tomorrow night for our school, but don't forget that I greet families 270 days a year at arrival. Small talk is bigger than grand plans. I love that. One of the things that, and Sherry's like nodding vigorously, one of the things that we often say at NAFSCE is, people will say, just as David, it doesn't have to be a grand, big plan. Sometimes, like, even small tweaks to what you do in your work goes a hugely large way in impacting the family. So just standing outside to greet makes a big difference. David, thank you for that.
I always say that relationships really are the foundation of the work that we do. And that small talk as people are entering and greeting them as they come to the building is a great way to start to make trusting, respectful relationships with families. I also say there's a reason why Walmart has greeters. It works. It's a great strategy. I love that, David.
L. Jack says, I have organized family meetings in the students' neighborhoods with food and collaborations with churches. And ASB after school programs, I'm thinking. But that's so important. Those intermediary organizations, those cultural institutions are just really the glue and the trusted spaces that really hold all of that together. So you know, that's such an important strategy and way to learn about families and just get a sense of what's going on in the everyday lives of families that we work with. That's terrific. And one more, or two more, Stephanie, or Stefan, Stephen and Steve, small asks and 2-minute conversations work too, especially if your kids love and respect you. Even staying after school at student events helps too, 100%. And Leveda says staff would board a school bus and go out visiting in the neighborhoods we serve prior to the beginning of each school year as a kickoff to the school year. I love that. Thank you. These are great strategies. So the second, you know, phase, the second way to think about, you know, how we think about our family and community engagement work, you know, is this notion of connecting. So reflecting is whereas reflecting is really this opportunity to learn about and think about, and really do some inward work and outward work. Connecting is really about, you know, those interactions and the partnerships and where that collaboration takes place. So connecting is really about how we're starting to build those trusting relationships with families, how we're cultivating mutual trust, how we're communicating effectively, how we're creating welcoming environments, both within the school and outside of school, and how we're reaching out to families, especially those who might be most underserved. And the second part of connecting is exactly like everyone is saying in the chat box. It's fostering those community partnerships for learning and family well-being. It's building community partnerships that support children and families, that establish systems to expand how families link to community resources. Often the number one question families have is, where can I send my child in after school hours? Or what are some great enrichment places where I could go for tutoring? You know, being able to link families to those spaces. And also part of this is cultivating social support networks and connections among families, building that social capital, building those opportunities for families to really feel like they are part of the fabric of the community, especially in communities where people might be spread out and might not know each other as much. Sherry, give us a great example.
I have a great example, and it's so cheap and so easy. One of the best things you can do is when you have events or activities that families attend, make sure everybody that is there has a name tag that they're wearing. Families, staff, educators, everyone should have a name tag, because one of the most important things you can do to start to build connections with people is calling them by name. There's a lot of power in names, and it's really important for families to get to know the people in the building, not just their child's teacher, but other people in that building as well. And it's also important for families to get to know other families. So when everybody wears a name tag and you can call each other by name, you really have an opportunity to build that social capital.
Thanks for that, Sherry. we want to know how you build trust with families. And I'm gonna read out as everyone's typing in the chat box. We want to hear all of your ideas and responses. Sylvia shared, as a bus driver, I always let parents know I'm available. Oh, that moved on me. I'm available. Oh, it keeps moving. I love that. I'm available to answer any questions they have. Plus, I pass on information from my church and community to help them. That's just terrific because, and also, we as being part of the school system often understand how the school system works. Where for families who, perhaps haven't grown up going to schools in the United States, or, school systems are very complex. Even just moving I'm situated in New Jersey, where I know in other states, the school system and how you make choices about school, all of that is very different. So, just being able to have somebody to ask questions to is so important. Andrew has a great comment in here. I love this. Communicate positives just as often as negatives. That's such an important way to build trust because it's really saying, I see your strengths and I see the strengths in everyone. Sherry, you're smiling. I know you think a lot about relational trust.
Yes, I do. And I think the positive comments are one of the most important things you can do to build trust. I had 2 children because my first child tricked me into thinking they were quiet and well behaved. And Tyler was not. And the only time I ever heard from school when Tyler was in school was when he was doing something wrong. And after a while, you start to feel beaten down by that. It's so important to, if you have to communicate something negative, always start with something positive. And it's better if you can make 5 positive messages for every negative message that you're going to send. Because if families, I think of this as like a love bank, and every time someone says something nice about Tyler, they're making a deposit in my love bank. But when they say something negative or critical, it's a withdrawal. And if I get more withdrawals than deposits, I start to think, you don't like him. You don't want him there. You don't care for him. And he's the person I love the most in this world. So it can really damage trust if all I ever hear are the things that he's doing wrong.
Oh, I hope we all finish this webinar thinking about our love banks. Thanks for that, Sherry. That's really beautiful.
Yeah, I love it all the time.
Susan shares, I build trust by listening and understanding the needs of my students and their parents and guardians. I make myself available before or after school. That's so important too. Just, being consistent. Sherry and I had the opportunity to, think and learn with a group of family coordinators from throughout the country. And we asked them this question. We said, what does trust mean to you? When you're building trust, what does it look like? They all spoke about listening, and they said it's about keeping our word. If we say we're going to be there or we say we're going to do something, we do it. If we know that we're not going to be able to follow through, we don't offer it, because that breaks trust. And Stephen has here weekly updates with families, as well as conversations about my life with them also helps. It's great. It really does. It's beautiful. Oh, one more, and then we'll move on to collaborate. But David said, teaching assistants in New York State are certified. That allows us to have a sneaky role. When things get tough, we could take over the instruction and allow the teacher, student, and parent to communicate at that specific moment. This is crucial because it allows us to help the entire classroom. And yes, it builds trust. Thank you. I love that, David. I love the quote of sneaky. Can't wait. I'd love to dig into that. So let's move on to collaborate. So whereas connect is about how we're really building those trusting relationships and partnerships with families and communities, collaborate is how we're harnessing those connections and really using them to promote learning. So when we think about collaborate, we're thinking about how we're co-constructing learning opportunities with families. There's this idea that's really prominent in the family and community engagement field is that we never want to do 2 or 4 families. We want to build together with families. So that means, how are we building upon family knowledge as resources for learning? Or how are we joining together with families to plan and implement and evaluate learning opportunities and services? Just like the example Sherry gave before, if we're holding back to school nights late in the evening and we never bother to ask families when the right time for them might be, then we haven't really done our job to co-construct or collaborate. And the second part of collaboration that's really important is linking family and community engagement to learning. And that means, how are we developing and sharing data systems so that all families are able to access them? How are we creating conversations around developmental and academic progress? And how are we expanding on family and learning in the home and community? So those are really those core elements of collaboration. Sherry, give us a great example.
So an example of this is if you are in a school and you are going to have an event or an activity that's going to involve families, asking them to co-plan and co-lead that event with you. I hear all the time teachers and other school staff say, you know, we don't have enough time to really do all of the things they're asking us to do. You don't need to do it all yourselves. Families would do a great job of serving snacks or helping out with the book fair or co-leading some of the discussions around student performance and how families can support them at home. Families just need to be shown how to do it, and then they're happy to partner with you in those ways. And it often alleviates the need for school staff to do all of these things and use up all their time.
Yeah, no, that's right. So we would love to hear from you. What's a strategy that you've used to link families to literacy and reading, math, and well-being? And such a great chat to start off this conversation. Here, educators know what A, B, C, D, and F means, but parents don't. They want numbers. You know, there's so many times that we hear, this notion of, what does a 1 mean? What does a 2 mean? What does a 3 mean? What does a 4 mean? What does this, how are we communicating academic data so that families really have a sense of where their child falls, maybe in comparison to a rubric, in comparison to others in their class, or maybe even more importantly, in terms of growth within themselves. What does this mean, and how are we communicating that? An A, B, C, D, F, they're just arbitrary artifacts. Our job as family-facing professionals is to be able to help families understand and learn about that. So I really appreciate that comment. What are some other strategies, that others have seen in terms of linking families to literacy, reading, math, and well-being? As you're all coming up with examples for the chat box, one of the things that we do here at NAFSCE is we run a Center for Family Math. And I was just in a conversation, a meeting with a number of parent leaders. And these parent leaders have been working with the math teachers to create family math nights that are run by families, where each family shares one game that they play at home with their children, a board game. So families were teaching each other how to play Uno, or how to play all these different types of games that have mathematics, or a loteria, or different types of games that have mathematics built within them, but maybe aren't always thought of as math, which has just been really exciting for the family math field to learn from. Sherry, do you have another example?
One more example I would share about that is families just want to know, what does my child need to know and be able to do by the end of the year, and how much progress are they making to get there? And then what can I do to help them at home? And so if you think about those three things, and then when you plan your events and activities with families, those are the things you should be addressing when you're having events and activities at school.
Yeah, no, that's great. And one last, so Parent University is coming from David every 2 months. That's a great way. You might have heard of academic parent teacher teams. It's another way that we've seen schools using these ideas. One night per month, we have a movie night with the principal and then a discussion or a debate about the movie. Oh, these are really great ideas. And then we had another one, sharing links to blogs for reading and hosting a family literacy night to showcase different ways to engage readers and spark interest in reading. Thank you for these. These are great. I love them. Lead. So leading alongside families is the last way that we think about our family and community engagement practice. And when we think about leadership, we think about our own leadership as family facing professionals. So how are we taking part in lifelong learning? You know, attending this webinar is one example. Joining professional associations, being part of the NEA, you know, these are all ways that we're taking part in lifelong learning. And the other way that we think about leaning alongside families is the ways that we as family facing professionals are advocating alongside families for systems change. How are we identifying and examining new and existing policies and practices that further family and community engagement in our communities? How are we championing equity as an essential element of our family and community engagement practice? And how are we standing with families for equitable educational systems and outcomes? And, you know, finally, how are we, just like Sherry explained and shared with us before, how are we reframing the conversations around family and community engagement to expand public understanding? Are we using space launch metaphors to help everyone really understand what it is that it means when we talk about family and community engagement, so we don't get bogged down in some of these other counter narratives? These are all really important. So what we wanted to do for our last idea here for leading alongside families is we wanted to run another poll. So we're going to launch a little poll right here. And the question we have for you is, have you advocated for change to support family and community engagement in your setting? And we're going to just get a pulse check here. Is this something maybe you've done in the past? Maybe it's something you're actively doing. Maybe it's something you'd like to do, or maybe it's something you need to learn a little bit more about. So let's give you maybe a few more seconds to think how you'd like to answer that. And then Jessica, who's behind the scenes with our Zoom, when it looks like most people have voted, maybe you can go ahead and let us know where we as a group stand. So excited. It's like watching the lottery, right? You know, you don't know what-
One great example too of lead that always strikes me is the equity piece, because another part of the research we did with frameworks, and this was done prior to the pandemic, but what we learned in that research is nobody really responds well with a message about equity. Many people think that you're talking about the equity in their homes, and they are not aware that there are challenges that prevent everybody from having equal opportunities to support their children's learning. So one of the recommendations based on our reframing research is, don't use the word equity, but talk about what's not equitable specifically. Talk about what is the thing that is not equitable and how you would like to see it fixed. And that's a way to share a message about equity that doesn't set off any alarms or cause any concern.
Wow, this is a pretty evenly split group. For some of you, advocating alongside families is something you've done in the past. So it looks like that's where, the majority of you are, but a lot of you, that's something that you're actively doing. I'd love if you'd love to type that in the chat box. I would love to learn more about it. Definitely for some of you, that's something you'd like to do. And for others of you, something you need to learn more about. I think when we conducted our research around these 4 domains of reflect, connect, collaborate, and leading alongside families, we definitely heard that leading alongside families is difficult. It's one of those that take the most time, and really, requires a lot of people thinking differently and really, coming together around issues like Sherry said. So it's definitely an area to continue and think about. So this has been wonderful. I think this is the part in our presentation where we'd love to open it up for any questions that have come in, or anything that's sparking people's interest.
So if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat box, and I'll go ahead and read those out loud for our panelists. Okay, so in the meantime, while you're all thinking of questions, I actually was reading L. Jack's comment about immigrant parents, and that got me thinking about, is there any specific considerations when talking about our immigrant parents, especially right now in a very tense environment where they have to worry about their and their children's safety, and might not be wanting to come to school events?
I think a really important thing to think about is that at the end of the day, what you want is for families to be equipped with the tools and the resources and skills that they need to support their students' learning. If they're not going to be able to come to the school to get the resources or information that they need, then we have to think about other ways that we can get that to them, either using virtual meetings or technology, or going out into the community where parents might be or where they might gather. Also, a great strategy is working with community-based organizations that work with those families, because they're already trusted partners. So if you can get the information to them, then they can share it with the families that have students in your school. But it is a very scary time for a lot of families right now, and we have to be mindful of that and keep in mind that what we really want is to make sure they get the resources they need to help their children succeed.
Thank you, Sherry. Okay, I'm seeing lots of great comments in the chat. So thank you for sharing those. I'm going to just pull up another question while you all think of some questions, and we only have 8 minutes left. So, take advantage of your time with Sherry and Maggie. These are the experts here. So another question I have is, what's one thing educators often might not get quite right about family engagement, and how can they course correct?
I could start, but Sherry, I'm curious to hear what you think of when you hear this question. I think one of the things that we often hear is, I spent all this time, creating this event or putting together this resource or, doing this thing, and no one came. And because they didn't come, they don't care.
Mhm.
And I think that is a really dangerous trope. And I think what reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead allows us to do is to take a moment and say, what is it that we're doing together that we can do together? Let's reflect on, when I built this thing, maybe why didn't people come? could I have connected differently around it? Might I have built it together with families so that it might have been different? And, Sherry, maybe you want to talk about, a little bit of the framing messaging around caring. Because there's a lot of research that we've done that sort of points to when people think about like why do teachers engage families, it's because they care, or why perhaps do families become engaged because they care, but it's more than care. There has to be an intentionality, and an opportunity to learn and practice as well.
In our research, what we uncovered was that whenever you talk about whether somebody cares, whether it's families or educators or anybody else, people immediately jump to those are the people that care, and those other people over there don't care. And that is a dangerous message. All families love their children. All families want their children to do well. I want my children to pay for my nursing home. I'm ready to go. I want to go right now. But we know that they need to have an education to get there. And so families care. They want their kids to have an education. If they're not coming to your events, it's because of many different reasons, but it's not because they don't love their children and want them to do well.
Thank you. And we have two questions. First one is LJAC, and then I will go to Milton's. LJAC's is, what do you do when the principal doesn't get it and doesn't want to?
That's tough. That's really tough. I think you need to, I would encourage everybody to look at our framing reports, because there's a lot of really good recommendations in there about how to change the way people think about family engagement. So one thing to keep in mind is sometimes people are thinking about family engagement in a way that is not productive, that they don't see this as an asset to their school or community. And so if you can reframe that, using the space lunch metaphor is a great strategy, but there are others that work as well. And you can go to our website for more information about that. And I'll make sure that we send that to the hosts too, so they can share that out. But using messages that resonate with them so that they see family engagement not as something nice to do, but as an instructional strategy that changes outcomes for students, because that's what they're interested in. And so you have to foreground the benefits to teachers and schools and foreground the benefits to students, because that's what they're interested in. And if they know that this is a way to make their jobs easier and ensure that kids have better outcomes, they'll be more likely to get on board.
And I'll answer that. I think that's a great way to think about it. Another way that, we sometimes think about it, and this is from some of the work of Dr. Ken Zeichner, is this notion of teaching against the grain. What does it mean when we hold deeply values of family and community engagement in our teaching, but sometimes the conditions and the infrastructure of our places of support don't necessarily support that? How can we continue in our own practice to enact those values that we hold dear? And I think that's where this notion of community really comes into play. So, if there are spaces in your school where perhaps those spaces aren't fully being, where you can't fully do the work that you're hoping to do, are there after school programs? Are there libraries? Are there other spaces in the community where those values that you hold dear can come alive in different ways? And how can you leverage those as well?
Thank you. So Milton's question will be the last one. Milton's is, parent engagement is hard because the families haven't done well in school themselves. What is key to changing the narrative to make school a safe place?
Yeah, that is hard. I think there is a book that came out a long, long time ago called A New Wave of Evidence. And there was a study in there that stuck with me over the years of families that had kids. They lived on the border in South Texas, and they were seasonal migrant farm workers, and their kids graduated at the top of their class. And when this researcher went down and he asked the educators, what did families do? They said, oh, they didn't do anything. We never met those people. But when he talked to the families and said, what did families do to support their children's education? The family said, when our kids weren't in school, we took them with us out in the fields. And the whole time we were all picking fruit together. And we were telling them, this is hard work. And the only way you'll get out of this field is if you get an education. So those families didn't speak the language. Most of them had no education themselves, couldn't read or write, but they found a way to motivate their kids to be wildly successful. And so I tell people that all the time, because sometimes the family engagement, the form that it can take, can be motivating their kids to do well in school, to value education. And family engagement is a lot like an iceberg. And what we see as educators is just the tip of that iceberg. It's the things families are doing at home that are below the surface that we never see. Those are the things that have the biggest impact. So I would say, we can't write families off because they didn't succeed in school themselves. They still have a real important role to play, and we just have to help them understand how to do it. Well, we are almost out of time, and we did want to tell you about a few more things before we go.
So, and I do want to make sure we get these links to you, but a number of years ago, NAFSCE partnered with the NEA to develop one of the many, many, many micro-credentials that are available to NEA members for free through their NEA certification bank. So we have a micro-credential on family and community engagement, and we would love for you to explore this micro-credential. As you know, all NEA micro-credentials are developed by educators for educators. So, each of the modules within this micro-credential align with the ideas that we've just talked about here today in the family engagement core competencies. So if you've enjoyed hearing about anything that you've heard about here today, want to dig more into that, want to think about, getting one of your micro-credentials, this is a great place for you to go. The second thing that we wanted to share with you a little bit about is NAFSCE is a membership organization, and each year we hold something called the National Assembly for Family Engagement and Education. This year, the assembly is being held in New Orleans from October 8th through 10th in person, and there's also a virtual component, October 6th and 7th. So, whether you'd like to come for both the virtual, the in-person, for both, there will be many, many, many sessions that are going to be really diving really deeply into the ideas of reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead, and the importance of family and community engagement. And the last idea that we'll share with you here today is, if there's anything that you've heard here and you want to learn more about it and connect with others in the family engagement space, please think about joining NAFSCE. It's a great opportunity to continue to connect and have spaces where you can have these types of conversations that we've had here today as well. I think that's it from us, but go ahead, Sherry.
I was just going to say, if you come to the assembly, you get a NAFSCE membership for a year. So that's 2 birds, 1 stone.
I love it. 2 for 1. So let's stay connected. Any questions or comments, please reach out to me or Sherry. We always love to hear from everyone. But with that, we just really want to thank everyone at the NEA, Angelica, Dorothy, Jessica, for just inviting us to be here. It's been a pleasure, and just hearing all of your ideas in the chat box. It's really been a great conversation, and we've learned a lot from you too.
Thank you.